The majority of individuals do not encounter failure due to a lack of natural ability or a deficiency in intelligence. Rather, they falter because their internal state remains unprepared for the arrival of intense strain. Existence rarely offers a formal notification before a significant trial commences, nor does it inquire about your state of readiness. Instead, it thrusts you into critical junctions where every choice carries a profound weight, time appears to constrict, and internal sensations intensify beyond their usual limits. It is within these specific windows of time that the genuine architecture of your psyche is unveiled, revealing not the idealized version of yourself that you imagine, but the raw reality of how you function when the stakes are at their peak. One frequently observes others becoming paralyzed during pivotal moments, or perhaps allowing their immediate feelings to sabotage a significant opening, or perhaps overanalyzing a situation until the opportunity simply evaporates. If one is truly introspective, they may recognize their own reflection in these behaviors, as the harsh reality remains that intense situations do not actually invent frailty, but rather bring existing vulnerabilities into the light. Furthermore, when the cognitive system lacks proper discipline, it instinctively reverts to patterns of hesitation, avoidance, and rash behavior, which serves to amplify obstacles while diminishing self-assurance and driving one to act against their own long-term prosperity. Hence we find that triumph in life is not defined by a constant state of unwavering certainty, but rather by an essential sense of stability and the capacity to maintain clarity amidst a storm of distractions. Those who consistently achieve excellence in their professional endeavors, their personal connections, and their individual evolution are not devoid of feeling or possessed of supernatural traits. They have merely conditioned their mental processes to provide a measured response rather than an involuntary reaction. They have mastered the art of pausing while the crowd panics, of processing logic while others rush to judgment, and of remaining anchored when the environment demands a show of fortitude. Whereas most people dedicate their energy to physical conditioning, the accumulation of raw data, or the pursuit of fleeting inspiration, they frequently neglect the central operating system that governs every other aspect of their existence. An undisciplined mind is a chaotic and noisy environment that generates narratives which provide no benefit, and transforms passing irritation into a lasting sense of inadequacy. It convinces the individual that tension is a threat, that a lack of success is a personal indictment, and that any form of heavy demand should be avoided at all costs. Conversely, a conditioned mind views these demands as entirely neutral, interpreting setbacks merely as valuable information and maintaining a strict sense of duty even when the initial spark of enthusiasm has faded. This discussion is not a pursuit of superficial optimism or empty encouragement, nor does it suggest that one should ignore the presence of genuine difficulty. On the contrary, the focus here is on constructing a functional psychological resilience that remains effective during periods of extreme hardship, precisely because that is the only time such strength truly matters. Throughout the following 10 segments, you will discover how to refine your cognitive faculties in the same manner as elite performers, utilizing concrete frameworks rather than vague concepts. You will gain the ability to govern your emotional impulses, sharpen your internal focus, and retain a sense of calm when your surroundings are in disarray, allowing for precise decision-making under heavy scrutiny. Each section addresses a fundamental psychological capability that distinguishes those who fall apart from those who remain composed, and those who merely react from those who truly direct their own path. Furthermore, the objective is not to attain a state of flawlessness, but rather to reach a state of absolute readiness so that you are prepared to confront unease without losing your bearing and to think logically when others have abandoned their reason. Winning is not about the total removal of anxiety, but rather the commitment to ensuring that such feelings do not dictate your trajectory, because an unconditioned mind makes every challenge feel far more grueling than it truly is. Minor setbacks begin to feel insurmountable, while constructive feedback is perceived as a personal attack and simple delays are seen as a total collapse of progress. Yet, once the mind is properly developed, these same conditions become manageable, as you begin to identify potential pathways instead of mere obstacles and act with deliberate purpose rather than sudden impulse. This represents the critical boundary between being a servant to your environment and being the master of your internal experience within that environment. Therefore, as you engage with these concepts, Avoid the urge to move quickly and allow the principles to settle deeply within your awareness, as this is not merely content to be heard, but a methodology to be absorbed. Each idea establishes the foundation for the next, gradually altering your interpretation of difficulty and the weight of expectation until your mental state no longer buckles under the load. By the conclusion of this journey, the intent is that when you are confronted with a taxing scenario, your mind does not withdraw, but rather rises to meet the moment. Because in the end, the most significant advantage one can possess is not found in fortune or raw skill, but in a mind that has been rigorously trained for the task at hand. Opening the first chapter, we explore why most individuals succumb to pressure, acknowledging that the weight of the moment is not the true adversary, but rather one's own unrefined reaction to it. Many operate under the assumption that victory is built solely on foundations of talent or external preparation, yet when genuine intensity arrives, whether through severe deadlines or unforeseen complications, these advantages often disintegrate. This failure occurs not because of a lack of capability, but because the psychological system was never prepared for such high levels of energy, proving that external pressure does not alter your character. It simply displays the reality of your thought process. When intense strain encounters the nervous system, the body instinctively shifts into a state of survival, characterized by an accelerated heart rate, shallow respiration, and a rapid narrowing of thought. Unless an individual has deliberately conditioned their responses, the biological brain will prioritize immediate emotional relief over sophisticated, intelligent strategy, seeking to terminate the discomfort as quickly as possible. This explains why even the most brilliant minds often falter under stress, why seasoned experts may succumb to panic, and why raw potential is essentially worthless without the presence of cognitive governance. In the absence of training, the human psyche defaults to a triad of destructive patterns: the exaggeration of consequences through fear, the stagnation caused by avoidance, and the long-term regret birthed from impulsive reactions. These are not logical conclusions but automated scripts, and reliance on automation is a dangerous gamble when those scripts have not been intentionally designed. High performers are not characterized by an absence of fear. Rather, they have cultivated the discipline to witness an emotional surge without surrendering to its influence. This concept of separation, the space between internal sensation and external action, is the bedrock of psychological resilience. Whereas the average person interprets an emotion as a direct command, assuming that anxiety signals an objective problem or that discomfort necessitates a total halt, a disciplined mind treats these feelings as data points rather than directives. Reflecting on past regrets often reveals moments where words were spoken in haste or progress was abandoned for the sake of comfort. These were not calm choices, but frantic reactions dictated by the immediate weight of the moment. The reality is that pressure consistently arrives at a higher velocity than logic, leaving no room for real-time analysis, which is precisely why preparation is mandatory to install effective responses before the crisis occurs. Furthermore, attempting to bypass or avoid pressure only serves to amplify it upon its inevitable return, as avoidance merely postpones the inevitable while allowing the challenge to grow in magnitude. Those who consistently prevail do not seek the total elimination of stress. They develop a deep familiarity with it, viewing it not as a threat to be defeated but as a standard condition within which they must operate. They shift their internal dialogue from a victimized inquiry of why a situation is occurring to a functional assessment of what the current moment requires, effectively transitioning the mind from a state of panic to a state of purpose. This mastery begins with the singular habit of decelerating the initial reaction, recognizing that the first 10 seconds after a shock often dictate the trajectory of the following 10 years. In those critical opening moments, the primary objective is not to solve the external problem, but to stabilize the internal environment, ensuring that clarity is not sacrificed on the altar of false urgency. Another significant barrier to maintaining composure is the tendency to tether one's identity to the outcome of a performance, where a simple error is interpreted as a total personal failure. This framing serves only to multiply the perceived weight of the situation and restrict one's cognitive range, whereas a trained mind separates self-worth from technical execution. When the ego is no longer on trial, focus becomes remarkably sharp, and pressure feels significantly lighter because mistakes are viewed as neutral data rather than final verdicts on one's character. To begin cultivating this reliability, one might adopt a systematic pause. When tension strikes, halt for 10 seconds, regulate the breath, identify the sensation without judgment, and ask what the singular correct step forward is. This practice reinforces the ability to move with intention rather than impulse, proving that challenges are not tests of raw strength, but tests of one's underlying conditioning. Moving into the second chapter, we examine why emotional regulation serves as a profound competitive advantage in a world that often prioritizes raw intellect or luck. True success frequently hinges on the invisible ability to remain fully functional even while intense feelings are active, as life consistently rewards the regulated individual over the most expressive one. In any high-stakes environment, whether professional, competitive, or personal, the person who can process internal energy without being governed by it automatically gains an upper hand. Many falsely believe that emotions must be acted upon immediately to be authentic, yet unrefined emotional expression typically leads to fractured relationships and compromised decision-making. Emotions are essentially a form of energy, and without a directed channel, that energy becomes destructive, manifesting as the urge to lash out, quit prematurely, or make rushed choices that lead to avoidable regret. The fundamental challenge is not the presence of emotion itself, but rather the velocity at which it dictates our actions, as an undisciplined psyche tends to react at the exact speed of its internal sensations. Conversely, a conditioned mind possesses the power to insert a deliberate delay, a brief interval that serves as a reservoir of genuine influence and authority. When observing individuals who maintain their composure under extreme duress, one notices they do not succumb to panic, nor do they engage in explosive outbursts or frantic self-justification. Instead, they pause and observe, offering a measured response while those around them are still caught in the throes of reaction. This momentary suspension of impulse is never a coincidence, but is the direct result of rigorous training. Such emotional mastery begins with a primary cognitive shift. You must cease to identify personally with what you feel. Whereas the average person might declare a state of being by saying, "I am angry," a trained mind recognizes the sensation objectively by noting that anger is present. This subtle linguistic distinction is vital, for when you identify with a feeling, it possesses you, but when you observe it, you gain the necessary leverage to govern it. Observation creates the essential distance required for logic to surface, whereas a lack of that distance allows emotions to hijack the decision-making process entirely. While anger seeks out confrontation and fear searches for an exit, and while anxiety craves total certainty and excitement pursues risk, none of these impulses are inherently malevolent, yet none should be permitted to hold the reins of your life. Your primary responsibility is not the total eradication of these feelings, but rather the leadership of them. Furthermore, emotional regulation is a rare trait because many people erroneously mistake the intensity of a feeling for its objective importance. Just because a sensation is powerful does not mean it merits immediate action, as strong emotions often surface during periods of vulnerability, such as fatigue, high stress, or a perceived threat to the ego. A disciplined mind understands the significance of timing and recognizes when the most effective course of action is to do nothing at all. This principle is particularly critical in the realm of human communication, where a single uncontrolled emotional reaction can dismantle years of established trust and professional credibility far faster than simple incompetence ever could. People rarely retain a perfect memory of your intellect, but they vividly remember how you conducted yourself when the pressure was highest. Thus, emotional control serves as a shield for your reputation, your mental clarity, and your future opportunities. Moreover, maintaining this composure preserves your internal energy, as every instance of emotional overreaction acts as a drain on your mental resources, leaving you fragmented and exhausted. Controlled emotion, however, conserves this vital fuel, allowing you to remain steady over long durations rather than burning out in short, volatile bursts. To cultivate this, one can utilize a practical framework of noticing, naming, and neutralizing. First, identify the physical signals like a tightened chest or shallow breath. Second, name the emotion with clinical precision to reduce its power. And third, Neutralize the surge through controlled respiration and a relaxed posture to restore balance to the nervous system. Another transformative realization is that emotions will naturally peak and subside if they are not actively fed through rumination, which is the act of constantly replaying scenarios or arguing internally. A trained mind allows these feelings to rise and fall without adding unnecessary commentary, understanding that you do not need to solve the emotion, but simply stop fueling it. While this takes practice and feelings may still feel overwhelming initially, training builds a tolerance that eventually turns the unbearable into the manageable. This is where your advantage emerges. While others are incapacitated by stress or speaking from a place of volatility, you remain operational and clear-headed. This does not result in a cold or detached personality, but a highly effective one. A simple daily exercise to reinforce this is the 5-minute delay. When a strong emotion strikes, commit to 5 minutes of non-reaction to train your nervous system to trust a pause over an impulse, ensuring that temporary feelings do not dictate permanent consequences. Moving into the third chapter, we address the reality that focus is no longer an inherent human ability, but has become a specialized, trained skill in a world designed to fracture your attention. Modern existence is engineered to pull at your mind through constant notifications and a relentless stream of updates. And every time your focus is hijacked, your mental energy is significantly diluted. Most individuals do not fail because they lack the capacity for success, but because they cannot remain dedicated to a single objective long enough to achieve it. This constant distraction is far from harmless. It conditions the brain to prefer shallow novelty and immediate stimulation over the depth and effort required for genuine progress. Over time, this results in an inability to endure difficulty, which is the very space where all meaningful growth occurs. A scattered mind instinctively avoids effort, whereas a focused mind develops the stamina to tolerate it. When your ability to concentrate is weak, even simple tasks feel insurmountable and decisions become exhausting, not because the work is inherently complex, but because your attention is spread too thin. Focus is the foundational gateway. Without it, your discipline, emotional regulation, and mental toughness will inevitably erode, but with it, every other skill becomes significantly easier to construct. A common misconception is that focus is a byproduct of motivation, yet motivation is far too unstable to be a reliable foundation. Instead, true focus is structural, depending on how you architect your environment, your routines, and your mental boundaries. A trained mind does not rely on the exhaustion of willpower to stay on task. It seeks to remove friction entirely, recognizing that most distractions are predictable and that the real challenge lies not in a lack of awareness, but in a lack of tolerance for the quiet work of concentration. Individuals permit distraction because they have developed an aversion to stillness. To them, silence feels monotonous, and boredom is perceived as a psychological threat. Consequently, the psyche instinctively reaches for external stimulation to fill the void. However, boredom is not an adversary to be defeated but is, in fact, the threshold to intellectual and creative depth. When you intentionally strip away constant input, the mind initially rebels with a sense of restlessness, which is not a symptom of inadequacy but rather a form of withdrawal as the attention system begins to recalibrate. True focus does not imply a mind that never wanders. Rather, it is defined by the velocity of its return. Conditioning your concentration is about minimizing recovery time, reducing the duration that a distraction is permitted to govern your awareness. Hence, we find that the fundamental shift in perspective is realizing that focus is not about the accumulation of more tasks, but about the ruthless exclusion of non-essentials. Superior performance does not require more complex time management. It demands more aggressive attention protection. High achievers are unapologetic about what they choose to ignore, recognizing that every indulgence in a distraction is a direct concession of progress. They architect their surroundings to facilitate depth rather than convenience, establishing rigid physical, digital, and mental boundaries. A primary tool in this endeavor is the focus window, a predetermined span of 30 to 90 minutes dedicated exclusively to a singular objective. During this period, multitasking and context switching are strictly prohibited. Though the mind will initially seek an escape, staying with that discomfort is precisely how neural endurance is cultivated, much like a muscle being strengthened through physical resistance. Furthermore, a fragmented focus often stems from a lack of clarity. When objectives are vague, every incoming stimulus appears to carry equal weight, resulting in cognitive overload and paralysis. A trained mind identifies its primary priority before the work begins, asking what specific outcome defines success for that session. This singular focus sharpens attention and mutes internal noise. It is also vital to recognize that focus requires strategic recovery. An exhausted cognitive system cannot maintain high-level attention indefinitely. Many mistake the symptoms of burnout for laziness, yet pushing through without respite eventually leads to a total collapse of concentration. Moreover, one must account for internal distractions, worry, doubt, and anticipation, which fragment the mind from within. The strategy here is not to engage in a battle with these thoughts, but to gently redirect the attention back to the primary task without judgment. This patient repetition is the essence of training. To implement this practically, commit to a daily, focus block of 45 minutes where all external interruptions are removed, training the nervous system to trust prolonged engagement over impulsive switching. In an era engineered for distraction, the capacity for deep concentration is a rare and formidable advantage that restores control over your time and energy. This control leads directly into the fourth chapter, the construction of mental discipline for when motivation inevitably fails. Motivation is a volatile and emotional state, dependent on external factors like sleep, praise, or novelty. It is inherently unreliable. Discipline, conversely, is a structural commitment made in advance. Consistently successful individuals do not inquire if they feel like performing a task, they ask if the task aligns with what they have already decided is important. This subtle change in internal dialogue removes the opportunity for negotiation. Mental discipline is the capacity to execute the correct action even in the absence of emotional agreement. It is the art of performing while the mind argues for comfort, treating internal resistance not as a command to stop, but as mere background noise. While this feels burdensome initially, you are essentially overriding a biological preference for safety and ease in favor of progress. Discipline should not be viewed as a form of self-punishment, but as a profound expression of self-respect. When you repeatedly fail to keep commitments to yourself, you condition your mind to believe that your word is meaningless, which erodes confidence and makes even minor obstacles feel insurmountable. Conversely, every time you follow through, especially when the desire to act is absent, you signal to your nervous system that you are reliable. This reliability fosters a sense of calm and genuine self-assurance. The common error is attempting to transform one's entire existence overnight through sheer intensity. However, discipline is most effectively cultivated through consistent action at a manageable and sustainable scale. A disciplined psyche does not aspire to sporadic bursts of heroic exertion. Rather, it prioritizes the cultivation of repeatable patterns. This is the realm of the non-negotiable, a microaction performed with absolute consistency, regardless of one's emotional state or external environment. These actions are detached from the final outcome and focused entirely on the act of execution, serving as anchors for your structural stability. For instance, committing to a single page of writing rather than 10, or 10 minutes of movement rather than an hour, ensures that the habit remains intact even when energy is depleted. These tasks are designed to be almost effortless, as the objective is to build the habit of appearing rather than the habit of exhaustion. When enthusiasm is abundant, one may certainly exceed the baseline, but when it vanishes, the minimum requirement ensures the system remains operational. Furthermore, a significant transition involves the removal of dramatic or emotional language from the pursuit of discipline. Phrases such as, "This is grueling," or "I am uninspired," transform a simple effort into an internal crisis, whereas a conditioned mind utilizes neutral, factual terminology. By viewing a task as required, or simply part of the process, you reduce internal friction and keep the focus on the reality of the work rather than your feelings about it. Mental discipline also necessitates the closing of open loops, those unfinished tasks that silently siphon away cognitive energy and create a background of persistent stress. Completing even minor objectives restores a sense of momentum and provides a surge of energy, proving that while perfectionism is a source of fatigue, completion is a source of power. In the long run, disciplined individuals move with greater velocity because they prioritize action over endless optimization, allowing them to adjust and continue without delay. One must also recognize that discipline is not a constant state of total self-regulation, but rather the mastery of pivotal decision points. Most outcomes are determined by a few critical moments: the choice to begin versus delay, to persist versus surrender, or to act versus rationalize. To formalize this, one can adopt a framework of deciding in advance, scheduling specifically, executing without internal debate, and closing the loop by marking the task as finished. Over time, this system becomes automated, and the need for fleeting motivation is replaced by the reliability of the structure. Life does not offer rewards to those who wait for a sense of readiness. It favors those who act in its absence. Once built, this discipline makes progress an inevitable result of your daily existence rather than a matter of chance. Moving into the 5th chapter, we address the reality that chaos is not a rare interruption but the standard condition of a complex life. In an environment of shifting plans, rising pressure, and incomplete information, you are still required to function and lead. Most individuals falter in these moments because their nervous systems become overwhelmed, not because the problem is unsolvable. True calm is not a state of passivity or weakness, it is a profound capacity for active regulation. When disorder arises, the unconditioned mind searches for external control, attempting to fix every variable simultaneously, which only serves to amplify the surrounding noise. A trained mind, however, understands that internal order must be established first, for it is impossible to stabilize a situation if you are not stable within yourself. It is a common fallacy to believe that tranquility follows the resolution of a crisis. In reality, a crisis begins to resolve only after someone introduces a steady presence. Chaos instinctively triggers a survival response, shallow breathing, physical tension, and a rush toward catastrophic thinking, but a disciplined mind recognizes these as signals of activation rather than indicators of genuine danger. Since the physical state often dictates the mental one, the first step to regaining composure is to slow the body's tempo. By regulating the breath and adopting a relaxed posture, you signal to the nervous system that there is no immediate threat, allowing the mind to release its grip on panic. While chaos seeks to accelerate everything, you must deliberately decelerate the only thing you truly control, your own response. Furthermore, chaos feels insurmountable when the mind attempts to process every variable at once, leading to cognitive paralysis. To counter this, one must ruthlessly narrow their focus, inquiring only about the next controllable action rather than the total solution. This collapses an overwhelming scenario into a manageable series of steps, allowing for incremental progress under pressure. It is also vital to avoid emotional contamination, which is the tendency to absorb the panic and stress of those around you. Instead of reflecting the surrounding volatility, a trained mind acts as a grounded anchor, allowing others to unconsciously regulate their own states against your steadiness. By refusing to personalize disorder and viewing a crisis simply as a situation, rather than a personal attack, you preserve the clarity necessary for accurate decision-making, ensuring that you do not sacrifice precision for the sake of a rushed escape from discomfort. This inclination frequently generates secondary complications far more severe than the initial dilemma. Maintaining composure grants you the necessary time to select the optimal path, as strategic waiting is not an act of avoidance, but a conscious tactical choice. To cultivate this state of mind, one can employ a physical grounding method known as the triple-point anchor. When disorder strikes, shift your focus to the deceleration of your breath, the sensation of your feet connecting with the floor, and a singular, specific object in your surroundings. This practice anchors your awareness in the immediate present, effectively interrupting the cycles of panic. Such stability is constructed through consistent repetition in minor moments of tension, rather than during a crisis alone. Being calm does not signify a lack of concern, rather, it signifies that you are caring effectively, as it grants you access to logical reasoning, empathy, and long-term foresight. Life will perpetually generate chaos, yet the advantage will always belong to those who can remain centered while their environment is in flux, ensuring they become part of the resolution rather than an extension of the problem. Moving into the 6th chapter, we address the reality that setbacks are an unavoidable facet of existence, but their ultimate meaning is a matter of personal choice. The average individual often interprets a reversal as a personal indictment, allowing a single error to evolve into a narrative about their inherent worth and destined failure. This internal story weakens the psyche far more than the event itself. A disciplined mind, however, shifts the inquiry from a victimized "Why is this happening?" to a functional "What is the lesson here?" Setbacks themselves do not deplete your fortitude, your interpretation of them does. While the nervous system may react with immediate disappointment or shame, the danger lies in attaching significant meaning to those feelings. By separating the objective event from your identity, treating the event as data and the identity as a decision, you prevent temporary discomfort from hardening into long-term fragility. Elite performers encounter obstacles more frequently because they operate at the edge of their capabilities, yet they are distinguished by their velocity of recovery. They do not dwell on the past, they extract the inherent value and advance. Many struggle with setbacks because they harbor the false expectation of linear progress, leading to heightened frustration when reality deviates from that path. A trained mind anticipates friction and resistance, which minimizes the emotional shock when barriers appear. Furthermore, the trap of comparison often distorts perception, as one compares their internal struggle to the curated highlights of others. Strength is built by returning to the arena rather than retreating under the guise of self-protection. True resilience requires the habit of deliberate reframing, not through the denial of reality, but by choosing a functional interpretation that focuses on missing skills or necessary adjustments rather than personal failure. To process setbacks effectively, one should follow a cycle of observation, extraction, and application. First, describe the event factually and without emotional color. Second, identify one specific contributing factor. And third, decide on a minor adjustment to implement immediately. This process transforms a negative event into a feedback loop, ensuring that action takes the place of unproductive rumination. True strength is not the absence of being affected by life, but the ability to be affected without being derailed. By normalizing setbacks as signs of a demanding and worthwhile path, they lose their emotional weight. Mental fortitude is forged during the recovery phase, teaching the mind that discomfort is survivable and eventually stripping fear of its influence. A practical exercise is the neutral review, where you record one fact, one lesson, and one action following a setback before moving forward without further dwelling. As we transition into the 7th chapter, we explore the reality of winning the internal dialogue, recognizing that every significant conflict is decided twice, first within the psyche and subsequently in reality. Most individuals do not succumb to external circumstances. They falter because of the destructive conversation occurring within their own minds while those circumstances are unfolding. The narrative you maintain during a challenge determines whether you remain a capable actor or a passive victim of the moment. Mastering this internal speech is the final frontier of mental conditioning, ensuring that your inner voice serves as a source of direction and strength rather than a catalyst for collapse. The internal conversation, often occurring beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, exerts a more profound influence on emotions and behavior than any external stimulus. While an undisciplined mind speaks without restraint, a conditioned psyche deliberately selects its vocabulary, recognizing that the inner voice is never truly neutral. It frames every situation, assigns a specific meaning to events, and predicts potential outcomes. If this voice remains chaotic or fearful, it diminishes your capacity before you even begin to act. Conversely, a direct and constructive internal narrative provides essential stability under pressure. This explains why two individuals can encounter identical circumstances yet produce vastly different results. Mastery of this dialogue is not a pursuit of superficial positivity but of functional efficiency. Many erroneously equate self-improvement with harsh self-criticism, yet constant internal attacks only serve to heighten anxiety and accelerate burnout. A trained mind learns to correct errors without attacking the self, shifting from "I always fail" to "that specific approach was ineffective," thereby preserving agency rather than destroying it. Internal dialogue must be a servant to action rather than an outlet for emotion. Performance invariably drops when language becomes dramatic, vague, or absolute. Terms like always, never, or nothing create psychological traps that restrict movement. A disciplined mind utilizes specific, neutral language and understands that thoughts are not commands. The human mind generates thousands of thoughts daily, the majority of which are mere noise. While an untrained mind engages in a debate with every unhelpful thought, a trained mind filters them, replacing distractions with command language. These are simple, action-oriented directives such as decelerate, breathe, or focus on the immediate step, which ground the psyche in behavior rather than feeling. Elite performers do not rely on grand internal speeches. They guide themselves with precise instructions. Furthermore, they avoid prediction overload by limiting their time horizon, asking what is required in the immediate moment rather than agonizing over hypothetical failures. Reducing the time frame of concern directly reduces the level of anxiety. Because repeated thoughts eventually crystallize into beliefs and self-concepts, the manner in which you speak to yourself defines how you perceive your own capability. If your internal voice is constantly questioning your worth, your nervous system remains in a defensive, high-stress state. Winning this internal conflict involves becoming a leader to yourself who is firm yet fair, neither permissive nor abusive, but consistently clear. This can be achieved through a framework of noticing the tone of your thoughts, interrupting unhelpful patterns decisively, and directing your attention toward a clear goal-aligned instruction. This process requires only seconds but can fundamentally alter the trajectory of your performance. Often, silence is preferable to commentary. Overthinking merely feeds anxiety, whereas quiet attention restores balance. A practical daily exercise is the language audit, where you identify one phrase that weakens you and replace it with a neutral directive, such as trading. This is overwhelming. 4. One step at a time. Moving into the 8th chapter, we define mental toughness not as aggression or the forced suppression of pain, but as endurance coupled with clarity. True toughness is the quiet ability to remain steady when discomfort persists longer than anticipated. Difficult situations are rarely brief. They stretch and drain your resources, testing your patience more than your peak intensity. Most individuals falter in the middle of a challenge because they harbor an expectation of immediate relief. When that relief is delayed, frustration builds and doubt begins to erode their resolve. Mental toughness is the refined skill of staying engaged without emotional collapse, acknowledging that while you may feel exhausted, that exhaustion does not have the authority to dictate your behavior. A significant hurdle in difficult times is the demand for emotional alignment, the desire to feel better before continuing. However, emotions are not designed to sustain long-term effort, therefore, behavior must lead. A trained mind prioritizes action first and emotion later, which reduces the opportunity for internal negotiation and preserves vital momentum. This requires a state of acceptance without resignation, recognizing reality as it is without surrendering your agency. While many confuse these concepts, a disciplined mind acknowledges that a situation is difficult without concluding that it must stop. This clarity removes internal conflict and prevents the waste of energy on fighting an unchangeable reality. Finally, mental toughness demands the intelligent management of energy, recognizing that pushing relentlessly without strategic recovery eventually leads to a total breakdown of the very strength you are trying to maintain. Relentless exertion without reprieve creates fragility rather than true resilience. Individuals of genuine fortitude recognize the necessity of deceleration to ensure they can sustain their efforts over a longer horizon. They understand that pacing is not a symptom of weakness but a vital component of strategy. In the midst of taxing situations, emotional fluctuations are to be expected. One day may bring a sense of high capability, while the subsequent day feels entirely depleted. While an unconditioned mind interprets these cycles as a sign of failure, a disciplined psyche views them as a normal variance of the human experience. Consistency is not defined by maintaining the same level of intensity, but by maintaining the same level of commitment. Furthermore, one must avoid the trap of catastrophizing, where the mind predicts that current suffering will be permanent. By narrowing the focus to the requirements of the present day, the psychological weight of the future is significantly diminished. Mental toughness is constructed through repeated exposure to manageable discomfort rather than extreme suffering. By engaging in small, controlled challenges, you condition the nervous system to realize its own capacity for endurance. Each instance of remaining present through unease expands your internal tolerance. A practical method for this is the stay with it drill. Commit to remaining with a mildly uncomfortable task for 5 minutes beyond the point where you wish to quit, observing the impulse to escape without acting upon it. This trains endurance without leading to burnout. Additionally, true toughness is manifested in the maintenance of standards when they are most inconvenient, upholding your principles despite fatigue or boredom. This is not about achieving perfection, but about refusing to abandon your direction. Fortitude does not demand constant heroics. It asks for reliability and the refusal to mentally disengage. Over time, this shifts your identity from one of fragility to one of survival-based confidence, rooted in the knowledge that while discomfort is fleeting, quitting is permanent. One final aspect of this internal strength is the ability to remain consistent even as external conditions fluctuate. An untrained mind treats the daily ebb and flow of difficulty as an indicator of progress or failure, whereas a trained mind accepts these changes as normal variance. This stability prevents the internal renegotiation of your standards whenever your mood shifts. You may adjust your pace, but you never abandon your trajectory. Furthermore, patience with oneself is an overlooked strength. Many surrender because they expect toughness to feel empowering, when in reality it often feels quiet, repetitive, and devoid of applause. By remaining steady without the need for immediate emotional rewards, you cultivate a deep confidence based on endurance rather than results. Difficult environments eventually stop feeling threatening. They simply become spaces you know how to navigate with calm and reliability. Moving into the 9th chapter, we explore the art of making clear decisions under pressure, recognizing that intensity does not remove your ability to think, but rather distorts it. As pressure rises, attention narrows and emotions amplify, often leading to reactive rather than deliberate choices. Most poor decisions are not a result of low intelligence but of cognitive overload, as the brain attempts to manage threats, emotions, and predictions simultaneously. Clear decision-making requires the ruthless reduction of complexity. A trained mind does not attempt to solve every variable. It identifies what is essential and ignores the rest. This inquiry facilitates an essential separation, allowing you to calibrate your response rather than being driven by blind impulse. Furthermore, clarity in decision-making relies heavily on the management of constraints. An infinite array of options often leads to psychological paralysis and heightened hesitation. Under intense strain, the variety of choices must be ruthlessly narrowed. A disciplined mind utilizes decision filters, pre-established criteria that simplify the selection process. Instead of an open-ended inquiry into what should be done, you ask whether a path aligns with your overarching objectives, whether it mitigates or invites risk, and whether the choice is reversible or permanent. These filters serve to eliminate inferior options with remarkable speed. Another foundational principle is the concept of reversibility. Not all choices carry the same gravitational weight, yet under pressure, individuals often treat reversible decisions as if they were permanent, leading to total stagnation. A trained mind inquires whether a course of action can be adjusted if it proves ineffective. If the answer is yes, the psychological barrier to action is significantly lowered. Hesitation frequently stems from a fear of error, yet it is vital to remember that indecision is itself a choice with its own set of consequences. Conditioning your mind to choose imperfectly but with deliberate intent is far superior to waiting for a state of certainty that may never materialize. Clear decisions also necessitate strict temporal boundaries, as endless analysis under pressure only serves to create paralysis. A trained mind establishes a time limit for deliberation and then commits fully to a direction. This commitment has a stabilizing effect on the nervous system, reducing internal noise and allowing for focused execution. Conversely, delay only amplifies cognitive clutter. Furthermore, clarity often follows action rather than preceding it. A common trap is the pursuit of external validation, where individuals look outward for reassurance to dilute the weight of ownership. A disciplined mind may gather input but retains absolute authority over the final call, recognizing that ownership, even when the outcome is imperfect, strengthens self-trust and future confidence. To remain grounded in reality, one must resist the urge to drift into hypothetical futures. Imagining catastrophic failures only drains your clarity. A trained mind returns to the objective facts, what is known for certain, what is within your control, and what the singular concrete step forward is. This can be formalized into a framework of pausing to regulate emotion, filtering options through established criteria, and committing to a path. This process prevents panic-driven choices and allows you to act with sufficient, rather than perfect, information. Flexibility is a form of strength, enabling you to adjust as new data emerges. Furthermore, clarity is enhanced when the ego is removed from the equation. When a decision is tethered to your self-worth, the fear of failure increases exponentially. A trained mind treats every decision as an experiment rather than a reflection of identity. If a choice fails, it is viewed as a lesson in adjustment rather than a personal indictment. This mindset keeps your decision-making process clean and adaptive. It is also vital to protect your cognitive capacity by minimizing decision fatigue. High-level choices should not have to compete with low-level noise. Therefore, simplifying routines and reducing trivial choices preserves the mental energy required for high-stakes moments. Finally, one must master the ability to stand by a decision once it has been reached. Second-guessing yourself after the fact only dilutes your commitment and weakens your execution. Once the choice is made, energy must shift entirely from evaluation to implementation. You do not reopen the internal debate unless significant new information appears, as constant reconsideration is more damaging to results than an imperfect choice could ever be. It is also crucial to separate the quality of the decision from the quality of the outcome. A sound decision based on the available data can still lead to a poor result due to external variables. By judging yourself on your reasoning rather than on luck, you prevent the accumulation of fear that makes future decisions feel heavier. When you trust your process, pressure loses its ability to confuse you, and you transition from reacting emotionally to responding strategically. Ultimately, achieving clarity in your choices necessitates an absolute acceptance of personal responsibility. When you fully embrace the reality that you alone are the architect of your decisions, your mental focus sharpens considerably. In this state, there is no room for blame or the fantasy of being rescued from discomfort. Instead, responsibility compels a profound honesty that grounds you in the present. When you stop viewing decisions as emotional crises and start seeing them as practical actions, the weight of pressure becomes manageable. Intensity does not demand a state of perfection, it demands a state of ownership. When your internal system is conditioned to simplify variables, commit to a path, and conserve energy, decision-making becomes a stable foundation even amidst high stress. You cease to fear or delay these moments, and instead, you lead yourself through them with unwavering intent. Moving into the final chapter, we recognize that winning is not a singular event or a temporary outcome, but a consistent way of operating. While most perceive success as the attainment of a specific goal or job, those results are fleeting. What truly endures is the psychological framework you return to each morning. A winning mindset is not defined by blind optimism, but by reliability in the face of reality. It means showing up with consistency regardless of your emotional state, environmental circumstances, or short-term setbacks. This perspective is built through discipline rather than inheritance. A common error is the pursuit of positive thinking over clear thinking. Positivity without structure creates a fragile state that collapses when reality contradicts the narrative. A trained mind does not rely on the temporary high of feeling good. It relies on principles that outlast the ebb and flow of emotion. This mindset begins with the acknowledgement that existence will never reach a state of permanent stability. Uncertainty and discomfort are the default conditions, and waiting for perfect circumstances is an exercise in futility. True success involves functioning at a high level within imperfect conditions. This is why consistency is far more valuable than intensity. While intensity leads to burnout, consistency compounds over time. You do not rise to the height of your ambitions, you fall to the level of the systems you have established. Therefore, a disciplined mind focuses on daily standards rather than distant fantasies. This requires a transition into self-leadership, where you stop seeking external rescue or validation and take full ownership of your internal state. This is not about self-blame, but about recognizing that your response to any situation is your greatest source of power. Winning is often a quiet process characterized by restraint, patience, and the integrity to do the right thing when no one is watching. It also requires a sophisticated understanding of time. Whereas most overestimate what can be achieved in a day and underestimate the progress possible in a year, a trained mind views time as a strategic ally. Progress often accumulates invisibly until it reaches a tipping point. Those who surrender early never witness the compounding effect of their efforts. Furthermore, a winning mindset demands detachment from the distorting effects of comparison. By measuring your growth against your own previous performance rather than the curated appearances of others, you keep your motivation internal and sustainable. This journey also necessitates emotional maturity, where you cease reacting defensively to feedback and abandon the need to be perpetually right. Humility accelerates learning, whereas ego only serves to slow it down. True confidence is not fragile. It does not require constant protection and allows for a state of curiosity even under extreme pressure. Resilience, in its most effective form, is devoid of drama. When failure occurs, you acknowledge the reality, process the emotion, and return to action without wasting energy on narratives of unfairness. Recovery speed is far more critical than the avoidance of setbacks. Finally, a winning mindset is defined by clear boundaries and the wisdom to protect your time and energy. Saying yes to every demand is not a sign of strength, but a lack of clarity. Over time, these consistent behaviors reshape your identity from someone who merely tries into someone who executes. You begin to trust yourself because your history of follow-through supports that trust. This does not mean that doubt disappears. Doubt is a natural byproduct of growth. However, a trained mind acts even when doubt is present, which is the ultimate form of freedom. Mental conditioning is a continuous process with no final destination. You must perpetually refine and adapt as life evolves. There is no finish line where effort ceases, but there is a state where effort becomes stable and challenges no longer have the power to overwhelm you. You do not need to be exceptional, you simply need to be consistent and prepared. When the human psyche undergoes rigorous conditioning, success ceases to be a target one pursues with desperation. Instead, it evolves into a sequence of quiet, steady, and repetitive actions. Over the passage of time, this consistency is precisely how victory is achieved in any environment. Triumph has never truly been a product of chance, nor has it ever relied solely on innate ability or the avoidance of hardship. On the contrary, it has always been defined by the manner in which an individual functions when adversity emerges. Throughout this exploration, a singular truth has manifested in various forms. Existence does not test your intellectual capacity as much as it evaluates your mental preparation. It examines your conduct when circumstances feel volatile or beyond your authority, measuring whether you succumb to emotional impulses or provide a deliberate, measured response. Most people do not encounter failure because of a lack of capability, but because their internal systems have never been disciplined to process intensity with regularity. Whereas an unrefined mind serves to amplify obstacles, a trained mind reduces them to a series of manageable actions. You have discovered that pressure is not a threat to be feared, but a condition to be mastered, that emotional regulation is an act of leadership rather than suppression, and that focus is a matter of protection rather than mere exertion. Furthermore, you now understand that discipline is fueled by systems rather than fleeting motivation, that calm is an active form of power, and that reversals are neutral data points rather than final judgments. These are not vague concepts but operational skills that allow you to remain steady even as the world remains unpredictable. Hence we find that a conditioned mind does not wait for life to become less demanding. It becomes more resilient so that the environment feels increasingly manageable. This represents the fundamental distinction between being a reactive participant in life and being the leader of your own experience. While you are not responsible for every external scenario you face, you are entirely responsible for the manner in which you encounter them. This sense of responsibility is not synonymous with blame. It is synonymous with control. The moment you acknowledge that your internal state is your exclusive domain, your personal agency expands. You cease to outsource your stability to external circumstances and stop waiting for permission to remain calm or focused. Instead, you become reliable to yourself, a trait that is often underestimated because it lacks drama, yet one that compounds into profound trust and momentum over time. Genuine self-assurance does not originate from early success. It is born from the habit of showing up consistently. When you repeatedly act in alignment with your core principles, especially when the desire to do so is absent, you teach your nervous system that you are a dependable actor. This internal trust fundamentally alters how you confront challenges, as fear loses its intensity and doubt loses its authority over your behavior. You stop inquiring whether you have the capacity to handle a situation and start asking what the moment specifically requires. This is the hallmark of psychological maturity, a mind that does not dramatize discomfort, does not crave constant reassurance, and does not buckle under uncertainty. This discipline does not necessarily make life easier, but it makes existence navigable, ensuring that even when motivation is low or emotions surge, your relationship to those experiences has fundamentally changed. Mental training is not about a total transformation into another person, but about becoming a more stable and intentional version of yourself. You do not require a total life overhaul or a state of perfect discipline. You simply need the consistency to apply these principles one situation at a time. Every instance of pressure now serves as a training ground, every setback as vital feedback, and every difficult choice as a moment of practice. While the changes may appear subtle at first, a brief pause instead of a reaction, or a faster recovery after a failure, these shifts eventually redefine your trajectory. Success is not a finish line to be crossed once, but a pattern to be repeated in the ordinary moments that define extraordinary results. Ultimately, the world does not offer rewards for raw potential. It rewards execution, and execution is entirely dependent on your underlying mental conditioning. As you advance, remember that you are not required to govern every variable in your environment. You only need to govern your response. That internal authority is where your true leverage and freedom reside. Pressure and uncertainty will perpetually exist, and challenges will continue to test your resolve, but you are no longer unprepared for their arrival. A trained mind does not ask for the weight of the world to be lightened. It becomes stronger and clearer within the struggle. When your psyche is properly prepared, you do not merely survive difficult situations, you prevail within them quietly, consistently, and entirely on your own terms.